It's less dominant than it used to be. It's less attractive than it used to be. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
Is buy-to-let dead, and should it be? Rob Dix is the founder of Property Hub and host of the Property Podcast.
Are there greedy landlords? Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. If you've got this scarcity, that's always going to be a problem.
Why do you think the UK population hate landlords when it's also such a popular way to make money?
Because they put up my rent 25%. That's why I hate
That'll
landlords.
do it, yeah. There's so many better ways to make money in the short term than property, but then for somewhere to store money and compound it over the long term, I think it makes property amazing for that.
So, Rob, today I want to answer two questions, really. I want to answer, is buy-to-let dead, and should it be? As in, should it exist? Is it a bad thing for the economy, for people in the UK? I want to start with that first. I would like to quote Marx, if that's okay.
A great place to start.
Setting you up. Landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they've never sowed. So, what value do you think landlords add to the economy? Starting you light here, mate.
Let's just ease it a bit. Like,
Yeah.
wow. So I'll start by saying I am a landlord and a tenant, so I see it from both sides, right? And I think if we move a little bit away from Marx, I think it's like, it's not an extreme position to say there needs to be the option of renting a home. So like, otherwise, like, well, no, you have to buy it, otherwise you're living with your family. That's it. I don't think anyone's really going to say that. So there needs to be, has some kind of ability to rent your home. So then the question becomes, how big should that sector be relative to others? What other options do there need to be? Where does it fit in the mix? And who should be supplying it? So there needs to be some ability. Like the social housing sector used to be about 30% of all UK homes. Now it's, I don't know, about 17, something like that. The buy-to-let sector has pretty much doubled, I think, from 10 to 20%. And so like the state sector is shrinking, the private sector is increasing. You probably want to have a balance between the two, but what is the right balance? I think that's, and on the private side, is it companies or is it individuals? That's probably, I think, where we want to kind of constrain the conversation, because like, yeah, you could say, well, you just can't have landlords at all, but it's like, that's just not a tenable position, right?
Yeah, we need to agree that people do need to rent.
Yeah.
I've rented it multiple times in my life, and like, I couldn't buy.
Yeah.
I didn't have the money to buy. I wanted to rent, but you think the conversation sometimes is just, we need to delete the landlords, basically. But what's going to fill that gap?
I think there's a perception that if there were no landlords, everything would be amazing. And I don't think that's true. Like it arguably would be better in some ways, but I just like, you can't say, well, if you just couldn't rent, then would everyone magically be able to buy? No. Would house prices even fall that far? Probably not. There's a lot of other stuff going on. So I think you can talk about regulating the rental sector. You can talk about how big the rental sector needs to be, and you can talk about who makes it up. But just going like, oh, no landlords, that just seems like super simplistic. Equally simplistic to say, no, like landlords are amazing, everyone should be a landlord. Like both extremes just don't make any sense.
Should we look at it then? So do you think, first of all, then, that the rise in the private sector is because of a decline in the public sector? As in the government got rid of houses? Sorry, there's drilling in the background. Someone's adding an extension to a HMO, sticking in some extra bedrooms at the back. So if you can hear the drilling, that's what that is. So do you think then it's a product of that decline in the social sector? Or
I think it's partly that. So like, I think there's no denying that when buy-to-let mortgages came out in the 90s, like property generally like became financialized. Like it was much easier to buy a place and rent it out, so lots of people did. So if buy-to-let mortgages were banned, for example, and take another extreme position, then you wouldn't get so many landlords.
They'd have to be cash landlords, basically.
Exactly. So you wouldn't get so many. So that, I think, is probably a big part of it. But there's also an element of like, because the social sector has shrunk, which is partly the stock being sold off and partly just not enough being built to keep up with the population, keep up with demand, then like naturally the mix is going to change. So you've got the government paying billions of pounds in housing benefit to private landlords, and people look at that and go, oh, well, they're giving our money to these greedy landlords. Well, no, they've got to be housed somewhere. So either the social sector is going to be absorbing that, which there's a cost to, or the private sector is. I think there's a strong argument that they're there should be a bigger social sector, and there are people in the private rented sector who would be better off in the social sector. But there's just been like a completely weird lack of interest in that from all governments going back as long as I can remember. Even when you could borrow money for practically free to kind of like go and have a massive building project, no one really talked about it much. So in the absence of that, you need to have the supply coming from somewhere.
Because it is interesting, the housing benefit point. I think the figure's about 25 billion.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money that goes, and it is just paid via the tenant to the landlord, essentially. But the problem is landlords, because, you know, they're in it to make money. This is why people do things. It's why people invest in the stock market. You know, they want to make money. They look for the highest price they can possibly achieve in a market, don't they? And without control, that just means the housing benefit burden gets pushed up and up and up.
Yeah.
So there's nothing stopping them basically just extracting more and more housing benefit over time. And if the government had that extra 25 billion in their pocket, that would fix a lot of holes, you know.
Yeah, but it's actually the opposite problem at the moment, in that they have sort of capped housing benefit. They froze it for a long time. They upped it a bit and froze it again. So it used to be set. So with housing benefit, you could access the bottom, I think, third of all rental properties. And now, because rents have gone up and the cap hasn't, I think you can now only access the bottom 5%, the cheapest 5% of housing with housing benefit alone. So basically people are having to top it up. And if this kind of gulf has opened up, so it's like, well, if I rent it to someone on housing benefit for this much, but I could rent it to someone who wasn't reliant on housing benefit for this much, then I'm either going to go down that route, or you're probably going to be incentivized to not invest that much in your property if you're not recouping that much rent. But then if you put housing benefit up, so people reliant on it can access more, then the housing benefit bill goes up. So you kind of can't win either way.
Yeah, I've read that there's 21. So 1 in every 21 adults in the UK is a landlord, which is 4 times the number of teachers. And I think it's twice as many like frontline NHS workers. So it's a lot of people, isn't it?
It's a lot.
So, you know, the majority, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this that are landlords, but there's also going to be a lot of people that aren't, that hate them.
Yeah.
Why do you think the UK population hate landlords when it's also such a popular way to make money?
Because they put up my rent 25%. That's why I hate
That'll
landlords.
do it, yeah.
Well, so 50% of the UK population say that they don't like landlords, but 80% of tenants say they're happy with theirs. It's other landlords that they don't like. So there's like a general hatred towards them as an idea, but on an individual level, people who experience them, most of them say, my landlord's good.
Yeah.
I do love my landlord. She just landlady. Yeah, she just replaced all my windows. We had some mold.
You replaced the windows with that extra rent, mate, by the sounds of it.
That's a good point, yeah. But to be fair, I said, we're not paying this increase in rent unless you fix the flats. And then she like fixed all the things that were missing and changed the windows. And we're like, we need double glazing, all these things. So we've got a good relationship with her, but every month you're paying 25% more rent. Yeah, it kind of hurts a little bit.
That's a lot as well to me,
yeah.
a big jump.
Yeah.
Go on,
We can talk about like why rents have gone up in recent years, but I think if we could take the like, why do people hate landlords? I think there's a few reasons. So like, one is you've always got like a minority of bad actors in anything. Like people get very upset about, you hear the horror stories about bad landlords because they are out there. It doesn't mean they're the majority, but they're there. In landlord circles, you get all this kind of really strong stuff about how terrible tenants are because there's a minority of bad tenants who play the system and all the rest of it. Most people are absolutely fine on both sides, but it's like you hear about the extremes, right? I think also there's a cultural factor to it. Like, I think because home owning is aspirational in the UK in the way that it isn't in some other countries, it's like if you can't do that, you're obviously looking for reasons that have contributed to that being the case. And I think you can make a solid argument that landlords have contributed in some way to that being the case. And I think another factor is the rental system in the UK is shocking. The experience of being a renter, it's like way less secure than it is. The way it's operated, it won't be in the future, but it's operating like a year-to-year basis. So the whole system is terrible. And so you kind of blame the landlord as part of that, even though it's actually the system.
Do landlords in general add to the housing stock that's available, or do they take it away? Because I think a landlord will say, I provide housing, I take units, I convert them, whatever. Other people will say, every landlord that buys a home takes one away from a potential buyer, so reduces the stock. I mean,
yeah, there's arguments both ways. I think we need to separate out the dynamics of how property values are priced versus how rent is priced and how those two things work. Because people look at high rents, they look at how high house prices, but they're caused by slightly different things. But do landlords contribute? I mean, I think there was a point in the past where landlords were. You could become a landlord with like 100% mortgage. It was really easy. It was the tax situation was pretty good. So you could have landlords outbidding owner occupiers quite easily. I think that's now far less common because landlords, the tax situation is completely different. They have to put in a 25% deposit versus a 5 or 10% deposit. They get taxed 5% extra in terms of the stamp duty and other stuff as well. So I think it's harder now to say like landlords are just flat out outbidding. They are contributing to demand because there will be some people going out there and buying homes. There's also an argument they can contribute to supply because builders will only build as much as they can sell without affecting their price. Builders aren't going to flood the market by building loads of homes that pushes prices down. So if you've got landlords coming in and buying new, contributing to the demand side, you could say that adds to the housing stock.
They incentivize builders to build because they know they can sell a certain portion of the units.
Yeah.
One thing that I've seen, so to caveat, I own a buy-to-let property. I bought it because I'm the generation that grew up watching Sarah Beanie and these kind of things, and I've always been. To me, I think it's like etched in my brain that it's a good thing to do. I also we'll get onto the investment side and why actually in a moment. But what I've noticed is that because of the increased costs that are being put on landlords to get units, there's a concentration of landlords bidding at the lower end of the market, which I would also argue are the units that first-time buyers can afford.
Yeah.
So gone are the days where landlords are buying £250,000 units. They're trying to buy the £150,000 because the stamp duty costs, because the deposit requirements. To buy a £150,000 unit, you're looking at like 60 grand in cash that you're going to need to hand over before you do anything else, you know? So it's almost like everyone's being pushed into the area of the market where the problem is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. And like you say, there is such an entrenched belief. I don't know if maybe it is generational. I don't know, but there's such an appeal of property compared to other.
It was propaganda, right? It was like TV-based propaganda that basically anyone could buy a home. Homes Under the Hammer, Sarah Beanie. I remember every time I watched that show, the outcome was like they've spent too much, but they've still made loads of money because the property prices went up.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it was, I watched that wide-eyed as a child, thinking I want to do this, you know?
But that was a weird time, and it's not true. It's not the case anymore.
I was about to ask, do you think Gen Z still feel the same way that we did? Like at bricks and mortar, you got to get on a property ladder, or do you think the perception's changing?
They probably feel pretty despondent about it, right? And feel like the housing market is not for them, or it's been taken away from them, which I think is why landlords get the blame, because when you've got a guy on TikTok going, I buy 100 units, like, you know, or I've taken this one starter home and flipped it into 6 bedrooms and I'm making 10 grand a month. And the guy's like, well, what the hell?
Yeah.
You know, and they've got the ability to go, I can bid more than they're asking because I can make this into a 6-bed HMO and sweat the asset, you know, and then the first time buyers end up living in a bedroom with an ensuite rather than a.
That's another reason they've got a bad reputation. I lived in one of these houses converted house in Kilburn before, like when I just got out of uni, lived with my friend. It was a house for probably like a 2-bedroom house. They turned into a 6-bedroom house. So like when the living room got turned into 3 bedrooms and everyone had one bathroom to share, it turned into like a shanty town. The bathroom was like flooded. We were wading across to get to the shower. Then the floorboards started getting weak because there was so much heavy use in the bathroom. And I'm just like, and the landlord was like, I want my rent on this day every month. I'm putting out £50. And we're like, you're just bleeding at 6 people who are all young students or like young graduates. And I think that kind of gives you the attitude that this guy's just greedy. Like, we've got one bathroom between 6 of us. What a jackass.
Yeah. Are there greedy landlords? Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Not all of them, but obviously they exist.
Yeah, exactly. But all, I don't know. Like you could definitely, like if you think it's immoral or whatever, don't do it. But I think it's a strong position to take that like having any kind of private provision of rental properties is bad. Because if you didn't, then you need to go, well, institutions would have to do it. And they're motivated by profit as well. Oh, yeah.
They're a lot less compassionate as well, right? If you're one of 1,000 people on a spreadsheet and you miss the rent, they're taking you to court, they're going through the proceedings. Whereas if you can pick up a phone to an individual and go, I'm struggling this month, you know, I always pay on time,
That's happened to me in lockdown.
Yeah,
in
they might go, all right, T, I'll help you out for a month.
I was there for 3 years, and then in lockdown, I was like, I just graduated. Where I'm not working. Like,
You're telling me you're popping bottles every weekend, going down to Revs to Cuba, mate, doing your little salsa dancing, telling the man you can't pay the rent. What the hell? You're going out 4 days a week.
Cost of living, mate. Hard times.
Do you know how much it costs to live?
To live how I want to live.
Yeah. That's funny.
Got standards to maintain.
That's funny. I wasn't aware that you were struggling. You had a nice river view and everything. You were doing great, mate.
Yeah. So I think the best thing is choice. Like, I think there should be the option. There should be private providers and like individual providers, and there should be institutional providers. I think the private providers should have to maintain standards and actually have a clue what they're doing, and I think we can talk about how like the balance is changing in terms of like who are the individual property owners. But having institutions in the mix as well, great. But something that we have seen over the last couple of years is rents for a long time for newly advertised properties were going up much higher than rents within tenancies. So if you were renewing, then your rent increase would be lower than if you moved out and they rented it to someone new. And so that's an example of where individuals are not, in every case, maxing the rent as much as they possibly can. They just want to have an easy life. If you're there, you're paying, you're not in any trouble, great. They'll just keep you there. An institution, I think, is less likely to do that because they've got an obligation to their shareholders to maximise value. And so you're probably going to see your rents going up faster.
So I have like a personal take on this, which I know you might disagree with, and I want to present the other argument to it as well. But I've made the decision just to not increase rent on a tenant like while they're there. If it works for me on day one, if they live there for 5 years and they pay that rent, I won't put it up. And people will say, oh, you should because it'll produce a better return, blah blah blah. And what that means is if they move out, there is that big jump then in the return because you go to the market rate.
Yeah.
I was reading an article the other day that was like why you should increase rents. And I think this is going to seem like a pretty bad argument, but they were basically saying if I don't increase the rent on a tenant at the rate of inflation, say, not only are my returns in real terms going backwards, but they're in a position where they're stuck in the house because the rental market around them rises. So they get to a place where it's like, oh, they're paying $600 a month. They live there for 5 years. They look around and comparable properties are now at 1,000 and they can never leave.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how I feel about that because you're basically implying that they can't save their own money and like buy a house.
Well, I think it can be true, but it's not always true. Like you definitely hear from people. You'll see it on Reddit and stuff like that. People go like, "My landlord's just increased my rent. I can't afford it, but I can't afford to move out. What do I do?" So that clearly does happen. But then I think it's quite hard to say. Well, morally, you must charge as much as you possibly can.
Exactly. Definitely the landlord argument. It was like landlords.com.
Yeah,
was the article.
Makes sense. Yeah, I thought it wouldn't be the Guardian. But then there's a lot of people who go like, "Fantastic, great. I've got more I can save. I can get my own place." So it can be true. But it's not necessarily true.
I just lived through that exact situation. Like they increased.
So you were stuck?
No, I wasn't stuck. They increased it 25%. I'm like, oh, I'm not paying an extra $5. Like I might as well say, I get my rent was 1.5, then it got raised to $2,000. So I was like, oh, forget that. I want a garden. I'm gonna go move out because I've got a kid. I want a garden. Grew up with a garden. We'll go find somewhere in the local area for. If I'm gonna pay $2,000, I want a garden. Yeah. Looked around, closest for a garden was like $3,000, $3,500. So I was like. I take it back. We're going to stay we will stay here for another year. And then she's like, look, if you stay here for another year, like I'll give you 5 years rolling. You can leave when you want, but I won't raise the rent for 5 years. So we're like, okay, that's really nice. Gives us some time. We don't have to rush. We can find our next home. Either we buy or we rent or we move to Manchester or we move somewhere else. But it gives us like another year to figure out what we want to do. So we could have moved, but I'm like, I don't really feel like paying $3,000 right now. So like, give me some time to save, and then maybe next year I'll buy or move. So it gives you the flexibility.
Should we have rental control so that there's certainty for both parties? Because it is a weird market, that, isn't it, where there's like a morality. Because in every other market that we exist in, the company is going to push the price as high as they can. Basically, things you buy in the store, they're going right to the level they can.
Yeah. Well, I think coming back to like, I'll get to that, but why there's an argument for you should increase your rents is if you were ever in a position where you needed to, then you'd have to do it suddenly, which it sounds like is what happened in your case. Like it's far more palatable to have like small increase if the market justifies it, rather than what we've seen over the last couple of years is landlords' costs have suddenly gone up because of mortgage rates and stuff like that. So they've gone, oh, I need to increase my rents. What could it be? What should it be? And they'll do a massive increase all at once.
But isn't that the investment risk that they take? So, they're passing that on to the tenant. tenant on a deal of like, you can rent here for this much, I would argue that the landlord has to stomach the downside sometimes.
I completely agree. Like I'm saying, like with the maximum being what the market norm is. Like you can't go, oh, my costs have gone up, therefore you have to pay more than the guy next door. It just doesn't make any sense. But it's fine. I think in your case, it's fine for you to just never increase the rent as long as you know that you'll never have to suddenly increase the rent. So,
but I structure my portfolio and my savings like that. I have cash on hand. I don't like operate with zero. So if the interest rates move slightly, I'm wiped out, because I see that as like, that's investment risk. And that's how I prepare for that investment risk, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think there's a lot of people who have not taken that attitude.
But then their attitude is like, oh, well, the tenant has to pay. I have to put the rent up. And it's like, well, no, you should. In the stock market, no one's going, well, I have to get my money back. You take a risk, right?
Yeah,
you take the downside.
Morally, I agree. And like when people say, oh, mortgage rates have gone up, so I have to, my costs have gone up, therefore you should pay more. It's like, well, I didn't see cutting rents from mortgage rate when mortgage rates went down.
Exactly.
But this is all with like, well, with the market norm being the ceiling on it. And that's the thing, because like if you have at the moment, you've got a situation where you've got more demand for rentals than there is supply. So if rents are naturally going to increase until there's a balance, right? Some people get priced out. That's just how it works. If you artificially cap the cost of rent below what the market would naturally have, then you just have a shortage. So you've got a different problem. So you see places like Sweden, the Netherlands, places like that, where they have got rent controls. Great. People, if you're in a property, happy days, but you've got massive waiting lists. You've got people who just can't find anywhere to live. So you're always going to have, if you've got this scarcity, that's always going to be a problem. And you can either sort it out through price or you can sort it out through a different type of rationing, but there's always going to be that shortage. So capping the rent artificially doesn't solve that.
So, Mr. Akarele, I hear you are a salesman.
Elite salesman, yes.
One of the best, they say?
I've got a little bit of experience in the game, yeah, I could say.
Done a few deals.
I bill.
What would your compliance team say about you?
They would say that I am always nagging them, and that essentially I have beef with compliance. I love the team. Compliance slows down all my deals, because every time I get to the finish line, they've got to check documents, KYC, GDPR, and it's just a nightmare. It slows the deal down by like 2-3 weeks.
It's always on both sides as well, isn't it? Sometimes it can be block on the other side.
Exactly.
Well, that's where today's sponsor can help.
Indeed. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get secure and compliant fast, and they stay that way.
They do it by automating compliance with over 35 security and privacy frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001, and HIPAA.
Yeah, all of them. And this saves businesses so much time and money.
According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers save over $500,000 a year in costs.
Not bad.
And they also help you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster, which is great because everybody hates filling out forms. If you're a business that needs to prove security and compliance, visit vanta.com/making money to sign up for a completely free demo today. Is there any cap at the minute? Can you just, in theory, up it as much as you want?
In theory, yeah, but in practice, no.
No, because the market. But
because if you think landlords set rents, go and try and price something for £100 a month more than other properties in the area and see if you get any interest. You won't. So the market sets the rent. So it's the whole supply demand thing.
I was like a downward force on the rent in my area, because I took your advice where you said, put the rent lower than the market rate so that you can attract a large bank of clients, like tenants, and you can, get a good tenant essentially.
Yeah.
And I did that. I went £50 below. The place I've got two parking spaces, a garden. I put a dishwasher in, which I think is like a modern essential. I would want a dishwasher. I can't
live without a dishwasher.
Yeah. I might sound a bit bougie there, but I think it's a nice to have, right? And we were against comparables that were small garden, no parking, no dishwasher, and we were cheaper. So we just got flooded with people.
Yeah.
And then I saw the desperation in people where they were like, we'll pay you more.
Yeah.
We'll give you more. And I was like, we're not doing that. Like, that's not the game, because it just then becomes this kind of bidding war, and that drives the prices up. I was like, that's the price. We did like 20 viewings on day one and basically had to cut it, rented it to this family, and they've just been like, thank you so much. We didn't think we'd find a place. And I saw was like, this is bad, you know, for people.
It is bad. But I do the same thing, and I always have to push letting agents to do that because letting agents will always price to the max.
Because they take a percentage, right?
Yeah.
So they want it up here.
Yeah. So I'm like, no, I'm going to research it and I'm going to go a bit below because I want to have all that demand. But what you're seeing is effectively the same as if rents were controlled, capped, whatever. So it was like below where it would naturally be. Then you'd have those 20 plus viewings for every property. You've still in your case you had 19 people miss out. They'd still miss out in the other system as well.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's Stockholm, but I'm not sure where they've got rent controls, and so there's basically just like not a supply. So you end up with like a sort of like a secondary market of people like sort of trying to like move. The tenancy stays the same, but the person changes because otherwise there's just no way of getting in. And so I think if you do, again, it's like if you push out landlords, you'd intuitively think, well, everyone would move out of a rented property, they'd become the owner of that property and nothing gets any worse. But in practice, it does. A part of it is density. So because you tend to get rental homes are more densely occupied, not just HMOs, but you get two people sharing, or you get like a family with no spare bedrooms and all the rest of it. Whereas when you get people buying,
they want a spare bedroom, they don't want a housemate.
Yeah. So you'll get a couple will buy a 3 or 4 bedroom house that they can expand into at some point, and so you end up like the rental sector, the rents get up, the supply goes down in the rental sector in a way that you wouldn't intuitively expect it to.
And I also think so like I think about the governments at the minute and the council tax increases where they've said you can increase it by a maximum of 5%. They're going to do that every year.
Yeah.
They're going to go right to the max. If you say to people you can increase rents by a maximum of X, they will do that.
Yeah.
Because they think like it's a target, you know, or it's like it's a limit. Like,
it's like university fees. Like that was capped. And they hoped that people would charge less than the cap. But in practice, no one does.
Everyone just goes to the cap.
Every time the cap goes up, so do fees.
Yeah. So I do think if you might get this, it gives the landlords permission. I think what probably needs to happen is, maybe you disagree, but the government need to build a load of properties that they own, and then they can influence the rental price through having that big bank of properties. Because if I rent in an area and there's a council house that's 800, I can't rent it for 1,000. They can influence the rental price through the ownership of stock, right?
Yeah, and that's why I don't get why there's been no interest in that. Because like I say, like I don't think having landlords in the mix is a bad thing. I think it should be properly regulated and all the rest of it. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, but I think you should have as much choice in the sector as possible. So I'm all for having institutional landlords, all for having a much bigger social sector. I don't know why you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, especially because it's an asset on the balance sheet for the government. So people talk about spending and debt. What they could do is they could build millions of homes. They then own those homes and they generate a return. And over the long term, that return increases because the rents will go up. And
but why did that not happen when 30-year gilts were like nothing? They could have borrowed billions to do this, but no one's really talking about it. I mean, even in opposition, I don't think anyone
we went for austerity instead. Cut, and with 0% interest rates. Yeah, we should have built infrastructure and houses, right? That was the time. And now it's like, well, it's going to cost you 5%. And
exactly.
but I still think we should probably do it.
Yeah.
I do. So one thing on this building of homes, there was an OBR report that said if we build the 1.5 million homes that the Labour government has targeted, the decrease in the house price that would produce would be about 1%. It was about 0.8%. It would shave maybe a few grand off the average house price. So people are like, it's not that we need more, it's that we need to make sure that people don't have second homes and Airbnbs and landlords. But the amount of landlords in the market since 2016 has been decreasing every year. Why have prices not fallen then?
Because it's completely different dynamics. We've got the same number of rental properties today, not proportional, the same number as we had in 2015. And the population's like 4 million more than it was in 2015. So you've got we should have far more rental supply in theory, which is probably one of the reasons why rents have gone up. But to answer your question, I think what's often missed is that the way that rents are priced and the rent market works and the way that the house price market works are different. So we've been talking about rents in terms of supply and demand, which is like pretty simplistic, but it kind of holds. Like if you've got more people wanting to rent, then you've got properties to rent, prices will rise unless you cap them, and then there's a shortage. Pretty basic. And I think people assume that the home buying market works the same way, but it doesn't because of mortgages because of borrowed money. So prices will always rise based on people's ability to pay. So if you suddenly magicked up all these extra properties, what would probably happen is the prices of those would, unless you end up with a gigantic surplus, prices are going to rise to the point that people can afford, which is why one of the big factors of house prices going up so much over the last 20 years has been the fact that you can get mortgages, owner-occupier mortgages with smaller deposits for longer terms. More people are buying jointly, so it's done based on joint income, so you can borrow more. All these factors mean that people are borrowing more money. Then interest rates went down, so like, great, now you can borrow even more. Now they're going back up again, but still. So you've got so because people can borrow more, houses are naturally priced based on people's ability to pay, which is based on mortgages. And that's why I think it seems intuitive to go like, oh, well, if you just build loads more, that'll solve the problem. But actually it won't unless you go to like some extreme flooding of the market with property.
Yeah. You saw that with stamp duty in COVID where they did the cuts and the house prices just went up by basically the amount multiplied by the affordability. Because if you say $5,000, you can afford 50 grand extra purchasing price because it's like 10% deposit, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we just saw the house prices go crazy because of the stamp duty.
Yeah. So that's why it's like that. I think that is the factor that people miss the most. It's the borrowing point. It's based on ability to pay. It's if the Bank of England did a report where like they were for all the price increase in property since I think 2000, they attributed 10% of that increase to buy-to-let activity. So not zero, it's something, but it's not the majority of it. And I think you can get the impression that if you just did away with buy-to-let and second homes and everything else, then prices would halve. But that's not going to be the case.
Are you saying then if we built 2 million homes, it wouldn't impact prices because people would still need the ability to borrow to buy those houses?
Yeah, and I think but yeah, you need to be able to borrow, and if you can borrow, then it just supports current prices. And so prices are just going to be like the way to make prices fall is to cap borrowing more stringently, or say you need bigger deposits, you need shorter terms, whatever it is. That would make
it harder to buy them.
Yeah, that
makes the prices.
That would make house prices fall, but no one wants to do that.
No one wants to hear that. Like the answer is not helping you save; it's make it harder for you to.
Yeah. But then you get into this like really. You get this really awful intergenerational inequality. I can't say that. You get to this real intergenerational inequality where, because now you've got like a third of homes, I think in total, are owned outright, so no mortgage. And so they're going to get passed on to kids at some point. So like great for them, not so great if you're not in that situation. Already, if you can get help from your parents with your deposit or whatever, that puts you in a position to buy it and someone else isn't. So it's like, it just becomes more and more entrenched over time. And also because you've got all these people who have benefited from this like weird blip when house prices went crazy for all these reasons we've gone through, then now, like politically, they do not want to see house prices fall. No government truly, really wants to see house prices fall. We are, as a country, far too, I think, over-invested in property. So much lending goes to mortgages rather than anything productive. But you're in this situation now. And to get out of it is so politically and realistically painful. I don't know how you do it.
I was about to say, can we get out of it? Because if these people, or boomers, are passing on their houses to their children, those children might sell, but realistically they might pass it on to their children. Is this just how we are as a country forever? Or is there anything that can change it?
I don't know. I do think we have to look at what happened in the 90s and 2000s as a weird period. So like your kind of price to earnings ratio went from, it doubled or did whatever it did. That doesn't mean it's going to keep happening. It doesn't mean houses are going to keep growing far above wages, inflation, anything else. I think that happened. It was for reasons, and those reasons aren't going to be repeated. So what we've seen now is over the last few years, house prices have got more affordable relative to incomes and everything else because they've basically gone sideways and everything else has gone up. So I don't think it's going to get more and more extreme from here in terms of house price growth. I don't think we're going to see more crazy booms, but I don't know how you get from here back to there, and I don't know how you sort out the individual inequality piece.
Yeah, because the political will is important, right? Because the biggest voters are the people with housing wealth and with state pensions. If you look at the activities that we protect pension purchasing power through the triple lock. We protect homeowners through not rolling out shitloads of homes to,
Yeah.
to fix the supply issues or whatever, and because they vote.
And what you do, like, as soon as you try to change anything, people get upset about it. Like Labour tried to get rid of the winter fuel allowance, which is kind of small fry in the scheme of things, in the grand scheme of things, and they had to go back on it or water it down or do whatever they're doing. So imagine trying to change something like massive, like we're talking about here.
And the saddest thing is as well, the people that would be punished the most would be the people that just bought homes. So, people that scrapped and scraped to get on the housing ladder would fall into negative equity if there was a big sharp correction in house prices. Because it's always the people who've just bought, right? The people who've got all this equity that, it was worth $500,000, now it's worth 400 grand.
Oh, well.
Bad, but
exactly. Which is why people think they want a crash, but they don't really want a crash because, like you say, it's the people who are in the most vulnerable situation because of the stage they're at who get hit the most, and everyone else go, great, I can buy now. Oh no, I can't. There's no lending.
Do you think that what we're seeing, say, in like London markets and like the stagnation of prices is the ideal outcome then, where we have like hopefully long-term wages increase and we just see property prices not really go crazy, and that's like the happy medium where people feel like they haven't lost money even though they have.
Yeah, we've been calling it the silent property crash because over the last few years you have had property prices going up very slightly in nominal terms, but falling relative to everything else. So house prices in real terms are down like 15-16% from their peak, but it's happened without any real pain. So it's like, great, if we could just have more of that.
I think what we'll do, I love giving jobs to the editor, Ben, who's sat over there. We'll put on screen the house price crash chart so that we can explain that, because I think people find it really hard to wrap their heads around. They go, house prices haven't crashed. But if you adjust for inflation, you can see that the house prices are lower than they were a few years ago, basically in real terms, even though the nominal price has gone up.
Yeah, and in RPI terms, they're the same as they were in 2013 and 2003. So that's nationwide. Yes.
What's RPI terms?
It's retail price index. So that's a measure of inflation. So there are two measures of inflation, and that's kind of discredited now. But if you use that one, which is what Nationwide uses, they show that if you adjust for their definition of inflation, then the amount that you're paying for your house on average today is the same as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel like that because the number looks really big.
Yeah.
These days people use CPI, which seems people think is a better measure.
Consumer price.
It's a bit more flattering for the people who use it to uprate things.
There's an argument for that.
Yeah.
If you use that, then I think prices are up like 20% over 20 years, but it's still not much. It's less than people think in real terms. So yeah, I think that's point that people find hard to grasp.
I think if people understand, and people do understand, that if they leave money in a bank account, it can go up by 1 or 2% a year. But if inflation is higher than that, they're losing money. So with your house, you've not got it in a bank account, you've just got it in bricks. It's a savings account where it's bricks.
Yeah.
Imagine they're gold bricks, basically, and that's all that's happening now, isn't it? The inflation is eroding the purchasing power of the money that you've got sat in the bricks.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it's growing slightly. And the high period of inflation that we had, we didn't see house prices go up in line with that. And also if wages increase, because they get dragged up by the pressures that inflation causes, people demand more money. The argument is housing affordability could improve. But this is like a 10-year kind of, like, it's not like a quick fix. It's not, no one's going to come along and go, there's the housing market solved today.
No, I think the best we can hope for is just a gradual continuation of the trend that we've had for the last couple of years, which isn't amazing, but it's probably as good as you're going to get, and it doesn't cause any significant pain. There is still the economics of it still work for people who want to invest, but things get better for those who want to buy. If you get more supply, that's helpful, but it doesn't completely solve the problem like we've seen.
I think regionally as well, you need to. So what I've noticed as someone who comes from up north is the stagnation of the London market is making capital leave London and go up north, and that's pushing prices up a lot up north. So where I bought my place in Wigan, the prices have gone up crazy amounts in a short amount of time. You're talking like 10% over the period I purchased it.
Yeah.
And it's because people are flooding, like the money's leaving the south. And a lot of it, is people that are like, I can never buy a home where I live. I'm going to buy one up north to subsidize my rent down south.
Yeah.
It's like proxy ownership. It's not, they're not like a landlord per se, but they are to supplement the fact that they can't afford to live where they want to live.
Yeah, exactly. And so we
Someone
have
like you, like, do you know what I mean?
I think they've all stolen my idea from like one of our first episodes. I was like, I want to buy up north. I can't remember who he had on. He's like, do you want to live up north? I'm like, no, but it's cheaper, so I want to buy up north.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense, because when you see how much money you have to tie up in London, it's crazy.
Yeah, so when we talk about stagnation and we relate to the south, that can be detrimental to the areas up north where it has been affordable for people potentially. Manchester now has become out of reach for a lot of people because investors flock to it. You know?
Northwest is the fastest growing region of the UK for prices and rents, and it's projected to be for the next 5 years at least as well. And it's because like London, the southeast has kind of hit this ceiling now. And so, the money's going to go somewhere else.
So it's not fair to say that prices everywhere stagnate. It's very much regional, local markets, right?
Yeah, at the moment, I've never seen such a stark regional picture. It's like if you're buying for, it used to be the case that you'd think you'd get your capital growth in the south, but you'd get your yield. So up north, you'd be able to, because you're paying less for the property, the rents are less, but comparatively less so. So you'd make more of a rental return in the north, but your capital return in the south. Now it's best in the north for both of those. Yeah. So as an investor, you're going to go there.
It's just best in the north. We're going to move on to, is property investment still viable? And I think a good way into that is, there's a lot of institutional noise at the minute. So you go on like property Instagram and there's a guy and he's got like piano music and he's like, BlackRock are buying everything, or Blackstone announced that they're going to invest $1 billion. Almost seems like conspiratorial, or like people are marking it as the end of days, that Lloyds are going, we're going to buy everybody's house. Is that a trend that's real? Is that what we're seeing? And why are they doing that?
It's a real trend. It's a trend from a low base. So I think it's like 2% of rental properties are institutionally owned in the UK at the moment. So it's really low. So it's growing, but from a low base. Why are they doing it? Because I think it's because they've realised that residential has done so well relatively over the COVID period. Like commercial has become a lot less attractive. Offices obviously have not fared so well. So you've got money coming out of that. And I think the reason that the institutions have always been anti-residential is like, it seems like compared to having like a big shopping centre where you can put 100 million in and you've got one effectively unit to manage, having loads and loads of individual houses or flats seems like a pain.
A lot of admin.
Yeah. So they didn't do it. So and then when they first came into property, it was like building blocks. And so like, we've got loads of units, but at least they're all in one block.
Place,
And now it's that the biggest growth area for institutions is suburban, like individual family homes. So I think they've got their heads around that. They're actually, this works pretty well compared to the alternative. And you've got this kind of inflation-linked income attached to it because rents tend to go up in line with earnings, which tend to go up in line with inflation. So that's why they've done it. I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think like mostly they are joint venturing with developers to get these built. And so they're not coming along and just like outbidding if everyone, like everything on Rightmove. So maybe that stock wouldn't get built.
So they're creating new homes.
Yeah.
It's got build to rent, right?
Exactly.
And they're building to rent whole housing estates, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So like the new build housing estates.
Yeah. So they might take the whole thing. They might take just some of it. You see different models for making it work, but I think there's an argument that that's contributing to supply. And it's contributing to choice. So and I think it means that individual landlords have to raise their game, because the
standards are higher.
You see, it is more professional. It's more professionalized. There are standards. So like if you look at a lot of not all, because again, it depends and it can be done well or badly. But if you look at a lot of the new stuff, the new houses, and been inside some of the new blocks, they're really well run. It's far more modernized. It's more convenient because, well, they're open to longer term tenancies. They want longer term tenancies because for them, tenant turnover is a massive hassle. So that's great. They tend to have like bills included and your Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. So it's far more convenient. And there's a level of professionalism and there's a level of recourse. Like if something doesn't go as it should, you feel like you can start hitting up the CEO on Twitter or whatever and do something about it. Whereas if it's an individual landlord, it's much
like, come on holiday, I'll get back to you in a month.
Yeah, exactly.
So T, recently we had a conversation with tax expert Dan Needle, and I think one thing that became very apparent is you're going to have a real big crypto tax bill.
I am.
What are you going to do with the money, mate? Where are you going to put it?
I don't know. Like every year tax season comes around and I'm stressing. I'm like, how much is my bill going to be?
I'll tell you how I do it. What's important for me is that money, that tax money, is completely separate to every other bit of money in my life, because otherwise I start counting it as mine. I start locking it away in the stock market or whatever. So I use a tied instant saver account that's just attached to my business, and I just put the money in there and keep it in there, and that's solely for the tax.
You can just ping it over to tax man when it's tax time.
I just know it's allocated for, and the stress that takes off me is worth its weight in gold.
Every January I'm stressing.
Check that out, mate. We've got a bit here actually about how you can check it out yourselves. I'll let you read it out because, you know, you're the best at reading.
I mean, I'm the star reader of the show. If you're a sole trader or company owner, check out Tide. New members can get up to 4.22% AER variable for 6 months. I say up to because it depends on how much you deposit in your account. The more you save, the higher the rate.
You can get this deal, plus you can get £100 cash back if you fund your Tide Instant Saver account with £5,000 in the first 30 days. You get that by using the code MAKINGMONEY. Terms and conditions apply. The code is Making Money, all one word, and you'll find the full terms and conditions and all details of the offer in the description below. The variable rate is correct as of the 19th of June, 2025. One thing I think people will say is the quality of new build seems pretty poor. Yeah. You know, a lot of these estates, they seem to have a lot of snagging issues, and people are trapped in those as well. You know,
yeah, I don't know. I think some of the worst of it has been sorted out. So like having leasehold houses, which is more of a thing in the northwest than elsewhere for some reason. I don't know why. That's been outlawed now because that just never made any sense. It was just another way to make money. A lot of the, I don't know, new builds. Again, I'm not here to represent the mainstream builders, but I think it's overdone. I think the problems with it are overdone. I think generally because building standards in general, materials and everything else have got so much better. I think new builds are for the most part pretty good. If you buy an old house, it's got a lot more character, but it's also got a lot more wrong with it, and because parts of it are going to be 50, 100 years old, and all of it is old to different degrees, and so there's always something coming up that needs doing. So yeah, there's always room for more. There's always room for things to be done better and higher standards, but I don't think it's that bad.
As an investor, would you buy new builds?
Yeah.
So you put your money where your mouth is. You'd much rather buy a new build, like brand spanking new or like 10 years old.
So that's sort of the range for me. So like anything built in the last 10, 15 years, I'm happy with. It can be brand new, or it can, but as long as it's modern, because as an investor, you want to have certainty over your costs as close as you can. So you don't want something that is just like, there's always something falling apart.
We had heavy rain on our road like a few months ago.
Roof fell in.
Literally half the roofs in the road, they either leaked, one fell in, and then the rest just.
I was joking.
We had leaks. It was like a flood just streaming through. They're all old houses.
Yeah.
West London, nice area, but like all the houses have been there for ages. So like roofs were getting done. Like everyone, all the neighbors come out. It's your roof. Yeah, me too. On the little WhatsApp group, everyone's like, "Yep, ceilings just come in." So yeah.
Are most of the people on your road tenants?
No,
do they rent?
About 50-50.
50-50. Yeah, because like it's one of those areas where people have taken big houses and chopped them into flats.
Exactly,
quite a lot of that, isn't there? There's a lot of that in London. We see that in Manchester now, in like areas like Chiltern.
Yeah.
My house is converted into 3 flats. It's a big, we've got 2 floors, but yeah, it's a big house converted into 3 flats.
Yeah. So I didn't know if it was like high propensity of tenants, but you say about 50-50.
Yeah.
And you've got community spirit?
We got WhatsApp group, everyone talks, it's a lovely place to live. Everyone's got loads of kids, and yeah. That's why I think like we have more respect for our road because we all like each other. So if you have an institution building a building, I think like, because we all feel like we're going to be, no one's in and out, people stay on our road for a couple of years while they buy. So we all have community spirit, no one litters. Everyone's like, there's some crackhead on the road, like watch your cars. So like we all communicate.
Oh no, it's just tea.
It's just tea and Damo on the night out, stumbling back to T's house. I think you do get the community spirit if you're there for a long time. And like at night, Christmas time, we all put up lights on the street. I don't, but the neighbors, I just enjoy them. But the neighbors all put up lights on the street, and like there's a real community spirit. So if you're there for a long time, I think you guys get that.
Yeah, agree.
Care about the area.
So is it the Renters Reform Act?
Yes.
Or bill?
I can never remember which way I ran it, so they renamed it. Renters Reform. Renters' Rights? Which one is it?
So basically, it's this big bill or act that's moved through 2 governments. So it was started by the Conservatives, and then the Labour kind of picked it up, or were like, well, we've got to do this. Could you summarise what you think some of the key points of that are, and then can we have a talk about if this is good for tenants, landlords?
So I think the biggest one, there's loads in there, The biggest one is tenancies move from being like for a fixed term to being indefinite from the start. So now you'll either go in and you'll do normally a 6-month or a 12-month tenancy, sometimes longer, but that's the norm. But now it's going to be like, there's none of that. So you're going to move in and it will run until you don't want it to anymore. So as the tenant, you can move out with 2 months notice, I think it is. As a landlord, you can only ask the tenant to move out if they have done something wrong. They've stopped paying the rent, antisocial behaviour, or you want to sell it, or you want to move back in. Those are the only reasons. So the people talk about no fault evictions, Section 21. You'll also see it referred to. So basically, the way it is now, at the end of that 12-month term, not within it, but at the end of that 12 months, you could just say, "Teep, sorry, you got to go. And you haven't done anything wrong, but I just want you to go for whatever reason." So that's not going to be a thing anymore. So there has to be a valid reason for it ending. So that's the most significant thing that's in there.
And if they have the valid reason, the landlord still has to take them to court.
Sorry?
Do they still have to take them to court, the landlord? With the new rules.
Do tenants have the impetus and the means to actually take people to court? And is the court system geared up for that? It's a lot to take someone to court. It costs thousands of pounds, and you're a tenant who hasn't got loads of money, and your landlord's like, "Get out." You probably
Well, I don't know how that would work, but at that point you could go to the local authority and there'd be some kind of enforcement. So you can't just as a landlord go in and like boot someone out. I'm sure it does happen, but you can't do it. Therefore, you should be able to go to the police, go to the local authority, go to someone, because you just can't do that. I think landlords would argue, I mean, I'm not saying that didn't happen. Obviously, that kind of thing does happen and shouldn't happen. But I think landlords would say that it's under their argument with the new system and even the current system is actually like, yes, you get landlords playing the system, but you get a minority of tenants playing the system as well. So it takes about 9 months at least to evict someone who's not paying the rent, for example, by the time you go through the whole process. So I think a lot of landlords would say, well, hang on a minute. That's why should I have to bear that? So like the courts need to protect. The point of the court system is to protect against the minorities of bad actors on each side, right? In the middle, everyone just kind of does their thing, and if there was no law, it would be fine. Everyone would figure it out among themselves. So you need to protect yourself against the extremes, and so that's why I think this change that is happening is a positive one, because I think renting should be more secure and should be longer term. The argument that landlords have, which I agree with, is that the court system is not geared up for it. And so like much as you should be allowed to stay in your home for as long as you want, as long as you're holding up your side of the bargain, there should be enforcement on the other side as well. So if you're not paying, then you can't stay there anymore. But the thing is that I think people are getting very upset about this change because it is removing this no fault route. Because what happens at the moment is if you've got someone who say they stop paying 9 months into a 1-year tenancy, it's quicker and easier to just wait to the end of the 12 months and then say no fault, because trying to go down the other route, which is where you prove that they haven't paid, takes forever and it's really hard and there's lots of ways to work it. So people are getting upset because that way, the relatively quicker way is going away. But even the relatively quicker way is not quick even now because the courts are so overloaded and it just takes ages, and the bailiff system is overloaded as well. So I think the argument is, when you change it so everything effectively has to go to court, because there is no fault. So under this circumstance, if you stop paying your rent, you always have to go to court. That means that the courts are going to get even more overloaded, which means it's going to take even longer. So on the landlord side, you could then be sitting there for 18 months, 2 years.
And they're not paying rent the whole time.
Wow. Yeah.
So this really heavily favours the renters and it screws the landlords.
Well, I think the law is about right, but it's about the enforcement of the law.
They can't back it up.
Yeah.
They can't do the process that they need to do. It should be quick. It should be a couple of months,
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of experience across a lot of units with your clients and all of the properties that you manage for them? What percentage of people stop paying rent? Like, how big a problem is it for landlords?
It varies a lot because, again, we deliberately target the type of property where we can be the most choosy and have people who are massive generalization, but people who are going to be the most secure financially. So it's very, very low. I think people perceive that it's this massive issue because when you hear about it, it sounds so bad, but actually it very rarely happens. I've only had one situation ever where someone's just like, in my portfolio, where someone's just stopped paying, like, good luck, get me out. It doesn't happen often, but there'll be sectors where you see it a lot more because people are more likely to fall into situations where they can't pay. And so the rational thing for them to do is to stay put, especially because local authorities won't rehouse them until they get like literally kicked out. So I'm not blaming them for doing it. It's the rational thing to do.
It doesn't seem fair for the landlord. Like, are you not concerned? Obviously, like you said, you've got great tenants, but does it not give you a little bit of caution? Like, wow, if someone fell upon hard times, I couldn't get them out for maybe 2 years.
Yeah, it certainly means there's more risk. I think people underestimate the risk now because, like I say, it could still easily take you a year. So if you own one property and you're relying on that,
it can ruin you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think people underestimate that now. I think it could easily get worse. Like I say, the system's better. If you invested in the courts, no problem, better for everyone. But in the absence of that, I think it could get worse. So I think it just does mean that if you are getting into property as an investment, I think you need to do it seriously as an investment, which involves having contingency funds, ideally getting to a point where you've got some kind of scale. So if you've got a few properties, then at least 100% of your income doesn't get wiped out if one person stops paying.
Yeah, especially if you're an accidental landlord and, you're just quote unquote normal people and you've moved into a house and you've got one flat left and you're like, oh, we'll rent it out. And then that becomes like this big ball around your neck financially.
Yeah. I just don't even think that works anymore. Just like that, the whole like having one property that you used to live in and now you're renting it out, or you've inherited and you're holding on to it, especially because of the tax situation. Individual owners now get taxed far more heavily than people who own properties within companies. So if it's your own home that you used to live in, you'll obviously own it as an individual, which means that it used to be the case, like in our property ladder days, that people would like do it, like, great, I'll have this extra home, I'll make an extra £300 a month in profit, that'll subsidise my holidays or whatever, all good. That just doesn't work anymore.
So let's talk about the investment then, because I think people would listen to that and go, people don't have to pay rent for 2 years. Taxation's gone up across the way, 50% all over the board. 50% of the UK hate me. Why would anyone be a landlord? You know, like, so can we talk about the positives and the market as you see it, and the people who should and shouldn't do this?
Definitely.
Go on.
So I think the biggest positive for doing it is actually nothing to do with property and everything to do with mortgages and leverage, because if you buy a property with cash, the return that you'll get on it is probably going to be similar to you'd get in like a sort of a diversified stock market investment, probably, but with a lot more risk and a lot more hassle,
a lot more effort,
and the tax situation is far worse. So why do you do that? But if you borrow money, and so then you're benefiting from appreciation in the asset over time relative to what you borrowed. So roughly speaking, if you buy a £300,000 property, you might need to put in 100,000 to do that by the time you've got your 25% deposit plus your stamp duty with the stamp duty surcharge and all your other costs. So you put in 100 and the bank puts in 200. Then if property goes up for a decade by 3% a year, which I don't think is like a wild assumption, it's kind of roughly in line with what you'd expect inflation to be, then after 10 years, your property has gone from 300,000 to 400,000, but your debt is the same as it was on day one. So you've basically benefited, you've doubled your money. You've got your equity gone from 100 to 200. So you've benefited from 100% of the property price growth while putting in only a third of the money effectively. So because of that just means it just makes it so compelling, because it's just like, it's unfair compared to other investments, because for property, you can borrow large amounts of money with relative predictability. Property prices aren't volatile in the same way that stock investments are, which is why you don't generally borrow money to buy stocks if you're an individual
investor.
investor.
Get margin called as easily with a property, do you?
Exactly.
We're doing a stock portfolio.
Yeah, so it just means that, so in that example, with property prices going up 3% a year, after a year, you've made effectively a 9% return on your money because you've only put in a third of the cash. So you get 3 times the 3. So you've made 9% plus whatever you get from the rent. So then that continues every year just because of inflation. So we're not talking about house prices doing anything other than the same as everything else, which is just going up in line with inflation. And we've also you've got your rent going up in line with inflation over time. And yeah, your costs will as well, but your mortgage won't. And that's the key, because you're harnessing the ability to borrow money, and you're harnessing inflation, which is like the most inevitable thing there possibly is. There has to be inflation. The system would collapse if you ended up with the opposite of that. So you get to take advantage of that.
Yeah. So the reason I started buying property, but I've got a lot of equity, like most 90% of my net worth is in the stock market. But, you know, if you think that we're entering a period of potentially higher inflation, it makes sense to have debt.
Yeah.
And, you know, property debt is what I would consider the lowest risk debt, because as long as you're paying the mortgages, they don't come knocking, you know, whereas with the stock market, if it dips below a certain value, they'll be like, you've got to put more money in or we're selling it, you know, and they don't have that live pricing element in housing.
Exactly.
So yeah, it is attractive. And it's that feature that you've described there, which has allowed landlords to become so wealthy, especially at zero rates, right? When the mortgages were dirt cheap.
Yeah. Homeowners as well, to be fair.
Yeah,
I mean, like homeowners can use more leverage because you can borrow 90% or more.
Yeah. So yeah, if it's gone up by £10,000 and you've only put 10% in, you've doubled your money, you know, at that point. Yeah. Do you think then that the long-term trend of house prices increasing in line with inflation is one that people can be certain will continue to happen?
You can never be certain, but I think it's highly likely, because why wouldn't it? So I think like the property prices like going way above inflation increases. That was particular to a particular time, a particular set of circumstances. I don't see that happening again. But why would prices go up by less than inflation? Like you see it with like electronics and stuff, because they get cheaper to make and all the rest of it. None of that applies to property. So you don't tend to get anything deflating. So the only thing that could cause it to happen is if you had either an insane increase in supply or reduction in demand, which is unlikely based on everything we've talked about, or if something extreme is done to sort of limit lending, which I think is the only factor that would bring about a substantial decrease in prices. I think it obviously very much depends on where you buy, because you've said how the Northwest is doing well in terms of growth. London is stagnated. But as a UK average, it's hard for me to imagine why prices over the long run, on average, wouldn't keep up with inflation.
Even in a stagnant market, then through this position of borrowing, you might, you know, like a relatively flat market, it doesn't need to be ripping at 10% a year, which I think is what a lot of people, a lot of investors have like chased. I think it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because it's the opposite logic of home ownership, where people's desire is to pay off the asset so that they own it. Whereas what you're saying is, or never pay off the loan, you know, like maybe one day when you're like 60 and you're like, screw this, I'm just going to consolidate down my portfolio and own 10 units that are paid off or one or whatever. But you're never trying to repay that loan.
No, it effectively repays itself over time, because it just falls relative to the asset value, relative to the rent, relative to whatever income you're bringing in. So it pays itself down, unless you want to then lever up, borrow more and go again.
You're weaponizing inflation for your benefit, right? Like I think in the modern world, people know that this is a force that's probably not going away. And by borrowing, the inflation benefits the borrower
massively.
Because it decreases the value of the debt. So it's a strategy that allows you to kind of get inflation on your side a bit. Whereas everywhere else, we're kind of...
You're aligning yourself with the government. Like the government is
print the cash.
Let's go. Keep printing. Quantitative easing. Let's go, baby.
Yeah.
On the flip side, I was at Princess Memorial Garden on the weekend with all my friends. We've got not all my friends, you weren't there, but like we've got like a dad's group on WhatsApp for all my mates who've had a kid. So once you got a kid, you get to join the group. And they were saying, like a lot of people said, the time and effort and the additional costs, unexpected costs that you have to put into property are crazy, and that's what's surprising the most. So what are some of the like costs and drains on time that you get by getting into a buy-to-let?
I think there's so much of it, which is why I think you need to be probably getting to some level of scale for it to be worthwhile, because like the regulation is far more than it used to be. It's not a bad thing, but it's true. And so you have to, I think you need to educate yourself so much before you even start, because not only is it quite a complicated thing, but also if you're buying one, you're taking everything and putting it into one property. So you better get it right. So there's a lot of pressure there. And then once you're an owner, you've got all the obvious costs of, like, you've got your repairs, you might have a service charge, you might have letting agent fees, and then you've got things happen, things go wrong, even if it's not something catastrophic. There's something, and you need to be able to deal with it. So I would definitely not go into it lightly, because there's always going to be and that's why I prefer to buy newer stuff, because there's less that can go wrong. Because you want to know, you don't want to suddenly have to replace the roof out of nowhere, because that would be a disaster. And you don't want the hassle of having to do that if you could choose it. You want to get as close to your passive index fund investment as you can. It'll never be anywhere near it just because of the way it is, but you want to get as close to that as you can, while still obviously keeping it up, providing a good service, all the rest of it.
And cost of, like, I'm not handy, I'm not a DIY person, and I envy the people that are, but the cost of repair and maintenance and even like getting people to decorate has shot up massively. We were getting quotes for £1,000 just to strip the wallpaper, like a couple of days work. And so I think people underestimate that. They probably you need to have a real good understanding of what the cost in modern times are for doing things. Because for what we would consider like a light, to bring it up to standard where it's nice, we redid the kitchen doors and replaced the worktop because it was all 15 years old, painted the whole place, tidied up the garden. It was 10 grand. You want to bring it up to a really nice standard so the family that move in have a nice home. I don't want to be scrimping and scraping on day one.
There's a couple of things that help with that. So one is that I think is an argument for buying more expensive properties, because the costs aren't exactly the same. So like getting someone to come round and tweak something with your boiler is going to be roughly the same price regardless of the value of your house and the rent that you're charging. So it pushes you that way. And also it really helps to have a long-term perspective. So like everything I talked about with leverage, that doesn't play out over a year. That plays out over 10, 20, 30 years. And so if you're in the game for that long, that's what you're looking at it for. And you're looking at your total return over that time, where a lot of it is going to come from this just pure inflation effect. Then you're not going to be so bothered about having these extra costs here and there, because like, yes, you need to make sure that you're not losing so much. You're not losing money. You're not putting yourself in jeopardy as a result of having all these unexpected costs. But it's like, it happens to me now. Like I've got someone who looks after mine. I'm getting WhatsApps all the time. We're like, are you okay paying £200 for this, paying £100 for that? And I was like, yeah, because it needs to be done. There's no point cutting the corner. And over the entirety of the investment, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I want to signal to my tenant that we will do stuff straight away. Come to me with the problem, because I think one of the biggest issues when I was a tenant as well, like I would feel scared to tell the landlord, like I was being a hassle. Whereas actually that just leads to bigger problems. Definitely. So you want to signal, we will get it done, just tell us. It's get it done straight away, because it's your investment, isn't it? You want to protect it. Go on, mate.
Would you say buy-to-let's changed then? It's not. Would you say it's instead of being dead, it's changed? So people might have in the past been like, oh, I'm looking forward to my 300, 500 quid a month. That's going to be great. But now you've got to be like, forget, I might be losing money every month, or I might just be breaking even, or I might just make a little bit, but it's the long-term view now.
Hugely, yeah. I think, and the income side is an important one as well, because of the tax difference that we talked about earlier, which started coming in about 2016, 17. Because of that, it means that it's far bit more tax efficient to own as a company, for most people, to own as a company and just let the money roll up in that company rather than taking it out personally. Because if you want to get the money personally as an individual, the tax is just, if you've got another source of income, the tax is brutal. So like having it as like I'm going to make a little bit of money extra every month. Maybe you do make a bit of money extra every month, but you can't spend it. You can't take it out to do anything with it, or the tax is horrendous. So it encourages this, own it within a company, have a long-term perspective, have a few, ideally.
How many?
I think you want to have the aspiration, not straight away, to get to 3 or 4, just to make it worthwhile.
Like an economy of scale in terms of management and risk if a tenant doesn't pay.
Yeah, it makes all the upfront effort worthwhile, because you should be doing way more research with property than you would do with anything else. It makes all the hassle of just dealing with it more worthwhile. You can, it spreads your risk a little bit. And it means if you start getting up to that kind of level, you can start having some systems in place to make it a bit easier.
Yeah, so I work with a guy that works for a large company, and he says, my attitude of, I just want to buy a good unit, I want it to look nice, I want to rent it out, I'm not bothered about sweating this thing massively. I'll charge below market rent so I can get a good tenant. He says a lot of people are coming in going, I got 50 grand and I need to retire today. I need to recycle the money, pull it out, no money in. And he's like, that just leads to really bad outcomes in terms of for the tenants and for them. Whereas if you have people that have a 20-year view, like an index fund view, which I think is where my view comes from, that leads to better outcomes for the tenant, for the person buying, more realistic.
Yeah. I think property is spectacularly ill-suited to making money in the short term, because you can do it, like you can buy somewhere and flip it and take your money out and do it again or whatever, but it's so much work, it's so hard, you need so much, you're tying up so much cash and taking on so much risk doing that compared to other ways of getting the same kind of return.
But that's what social media pushes on people, isn't it? That kind of like BRRRR or whatever. No money down, rent to rent. What's the Fifth Army?
You know, they're telling me I don't need a deposit for a house. I'm like, what do you mean?
It's rubbish. It's rubbish.
You don't have money for deposit, don't worry, I'll sort you out. Come join my course and I'll get you on the ladder. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's a perfect confluence of get rich quick and people are naturally attracted to property.
Yeah.
And so you like put it together.
Perfect storm.
You can make money.
It's just like Forex trading in investing, right? It's the exact same mentality of like, I can show you how to do this with no money and get really rich really quick. But for some reason people latch onto that and think that that's the majority.
And is it possible? Yeah. Do people do it? Yeah, some do, but most don't. And it's like, if it's far more, I think there's so many better ways to make money in the short term than property, but then for somewhere to store money and compound it over the long term, because of this inflation effect and the leverage aspect, I think it makes property amazing for that. So what we see, our clients tend to be business owners, high earners, people who are generating the cash somewhere else, and then they're putting it into property, going like, well, great, because I can see this over 20 years, this is going to do super well for me. As maybe they invest in other things as well, maybe they don't, but that's completely different from someone who's going to come in and go like, right, I want to retire next year, or like I want to replace my job. It's something you hit so often. And
I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and now I know I need to buy all the assets in the world, but I got $5,000.
Yeah. It's just so you can do it, but it's so hard.
So, okay, let's talk. You mentioned there about research and the depth of research people need to do. That can feel quite overwhelming. Have you got any tips or like ways that people can do that more effectively?
Well, we can put together like a page of resources, which maybe you can link or something, because we've got like a calculator, like a spreadsheet that will help you calculate your returns. And we've got like hundreds or probably thousands now of podcasts and YouTube episodes. So basically all the information is out there. It's all free. It's just finding your way to the right bits at the right time and putting yourself on this self-education course and basically discounting all the hype stuff straight away and definitely not paying to go on a course for any of this stuff, but just like the information's all there, but you have to invest the time to learn what you need to learn, both on the investment side, but also the legislation side. Even if you're using a letting agent, you need to know what they're meant to be doing, so you can see if they're doing it. And so there's a lot. I haven't really answered your question because
you'll give us a link.
So I'll give you a link
that's great.
that kind of curates some
of the best bits.
Yeah, exactly. That'll get you started.
I use your spreadsheet calculator thing. Can you put that there?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I think if you'd have answered that in one sentence, I'd have been worried. If you'd have gone, well, just do this,
Yeah.
If it multiplies by 5, then that's it. Like you just say you need to do loads of research. I think it's probably more useful if we link to resources. So,
definitely.
No, amazing. Thank you. You said that then people with one flat, like this kind of stereotypical, we move in together, we've got one flat, we'll rent that out. You don't think that works anymore. But then you were talking about how, if you have a long-term view, don't worry too much about today. Mm-hmm. Can you explain like why?
Yeah, I think it's mainly on the tax side. So something that we see a lot is, because I won't go into the mechanics of how it's all taxed, it's really boring and confusing. But the gist of it is, if you've got an income that puts you into the higher rate tax bracket, then your property income is not treated favourably. So it's quite hard to. It's hard to make a meaningful amount of money, if anything, from just the rent. And that's what people always used to do. I think it was very common in like our parents' generation to look at it as like, great, every property is like an extra 300 quid or whatever. Now, I think that just doesn't really work anymore. So yeah, if you do hold on to a home that you used to live in, then you will have the capital growth element of that over the long term. But then you've also got all the risk and the hassle attached to it. So like, you've got to take like, will you make more from that with leverage than you would from investing in the stock market over the long term? Probably, because of the leverage aspect. But you've also got a load tied up in a single asset. You've got all the risk, all the hassle and everything else. So you need to be convinced that it's worthwhile for you to do that. Well, I'm not saying black and white. don't do it, it never works. I'm just saying, I think it used to be the default, and now you have to think about it much more carefully.
Even with a limited company?
But you wouldn't own it in a limited company, that's the thing.
Yeah, they got to get it into the limited company, and then they got to sell it to the limited company. So then there's a stamp duty. So they basically,
yeah, you can't.
they get, like to get it inside the structure that Rob thinks is beneficial, they'd pay a load of money, which probably.
Which only works if you have.
So you think like just sell it, and maybe you could set up a company with the money from the sale or something, or like a director's loan into a business if you want to go down the investment route.
Yeah, you can do. It's very dependent to each person's situation, because like you do get you get situations where it can work out fine, but just looking at the majority of situations that we come across and what we get people writing to us about in our Sunday Times column and stuff like that, it's mostly the case that by the time you factor in the sheer the cost, the hassle, the tax position, everything else, it just doesn't look that attractive. If it's still the option that you prefer for whatever reason, that makes the one that you're going to stick with and not panic about, and it makes you relaxed and happy and all the rest of it, fine.
Two questions to finish off. This model, I'm coming back to like our landlord's evil. Mm-hmm. This model, in a way relies on the tenant paying the mortgage, the interest on the mortgage or whatever, whilst the landlord gets to sit there and ride the gain. Is this whole model really just landlords extracting wealth from renters?
I don't know. I don't see it that way, because like the way I look at that is you're always going to have a housing cost, whatever you do. So you're either renting a property from a landlord or you're renting money from the bank. So you're paying interest on your mortgage. So like if you own a place, it's not all just like capital repayments. Like the vast majority of it at the start is interest. So I don't think it's a fair characterization. I think it is fair to say, like, if you were lucky enough to have assets and to have property and be able to borrow money during that whole highly weird period when property prices were going crazy and then money was free and all the rest of it, then you will have ended up in a far better position than someone who is just like coming into their 20s now. And that is not fair, but that's how it is.
Yeah, I guess you could say, is Coca-Cola just extracting value for people because it's charging for drinks when they could just get free water? Or do you know what I mean? Like, you could say it about any product that ultimately, but there is a value exchange there in the sense of Coca-Cola gives people a drink that they want to drink.
Yeah.
Landlords provide housing. But like you say, there's this weird moral layer on top because housing is an essential that people almost think, it's like the water companies, isn't it? People get really... They think that shouldn't be something that people make money from.
Yeah, but exactly. I mean, there's got to be there is a housing service element, and then there's also just like there's an asset element. It's like if you need it to be provided by if you need someone to front the money to buy the thing, to take the risk, so it's there for you to rent if you want to, then there needs to be a motive for them to do that. Yeah. And so the only alternative to that is either all state provision, or it's like everyone owns their home. So again, we're coming back to where we were at the start, where it's just like, I think you could argue about the size of it, how it's regulated, what the experience is like, all these things, but you can't say that it's just wrong to have any kind of profit motive flat out.
People don't really mind about the profit motives of the bank on the mortgages that they provide, because they feel like that gives them an ability to buy a house. If we said banks can't make money from mortgages, no one's got a mortgage. You need 100% to buy your house every time.
Exactly. But if you look at the mechanics of that, it's like they've just magicked up the money out of nowhere to lend it to you, and they're making a load of money. Then they get bailed out if it all goes wrong.
So you want to talk morality. Exactly. They're magic money machines and stuff. Okay, and then finally, is buy-to-let dead?
I think in some situations, yes, but in general, no. And we've talked about some of the situations. Like, I think it's definitely harder than it used to be, and there are some situations where it just doesn't work. But the model that I use, that we talk about a lot, that still very much works. And so buy-to-let's not dead, but it's less dominant than it used to be. It's less attractive than it used to be, especially in the short term. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
Go on, NT, what do you think about that one?
A little bit daunting trying to get into the property market, isn't it? Like, you've got a lot of factors you've got to take into account.
You were just going to be like that one, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. I like that one. How much? But yeah.
It is a lot of work, a lot of research. It's a big decision, isn't it? I'll tell you what, we'll link below everything that Rob said he would provide us. I think there was a calculator and a load of other resources to educate yourself and help you make a good decision before you jump in.